All right, let's talk about this because, there's a lot to unpack here. So friends, it really does feel like Kody Brown has officially lost the plot. This week on Sister Wives, we see Christine and her husband David sit down with Kody, and believe it or not, Kody decides it's time to apologize to Christine. Now, last week, we got the first half of this so-called apology. That's when Kody said he was sorry for telling Christine that he never loved her. And remember, he said this while sitting right across from her new husband, David. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it, especially since Kody had already told Christine years ago that their marriage was loveless. So yes, by the end, that relationship clearly had no love left in it. But was it always loveless? That's still up for debate. Either way, the whole situation is painfully uncomfortable. And just when you think it can't get more awkward, along comes this Sunday's episode. Christine and David are stuck listening as Kody stumbles his way through the rest of the apology. And here's where it really goes off the rails. Kody suddenly starts talking about how their relationship was beautiful, magical, full of good moments, almost poetic. And I'm sitting there thinking, hold on, what kind of apology is this? Seriously, this is one of the strangest apologies I've ever heard. Christine and David's reactions were exactly what most of us would have felt in that moment. Polite, confused, and probably wondering if we accidentally wandered into the wrong conversation. Kody goes on to say the relationship was a life experience, that it was poetic. He compares it to a storm and a sunset. Hard days, good days, all wrapped up in something beautiful, at least from a poet's point of view. I'm sorry, what? I have never in my life heard someone say, "I'm sorry I didn't love you," and then immediately follow it up with a flowery speech about how wonderful and poetic the relationship supposedly was. Storms, sunshine, beauty, poetry, it was like listening to pure word salad. A lot of words, very little meaning. And look, we didn't see everything that happened in their marriage. None of us did. But we saw enough. We saw how Kody treated Christine over the years. We heard the things he said to her and about her. And based on that, I think most of us would agree, this was not some sweeping love poem. If anything, it sounded more like the ramblings of a tortured soul trying to rewrite history. Maybe a tortured poet, sure, but definitely not someone describing a deep, healthy love. What on earth is he even talking about? Does he honestly forget that we all watched this play out on television? The good news? Christine doesn't need anything from him anymore. He's no longer part of her life in that way, and she doesn't have to worry about managing his feelings. She's not asking him for an apology. She doesn't need one. And when David steps in, calmly but firmly, and says, "Listen, you offended my wife. Would you give me an apology, please?" That moment says everything. It's a clean break, a clear goodbye. And honestly, after all this poetic nonsense, it feels like exactly the right ending. When David steps in and says something like, "Hey, listen, my wife has my," well, you know, it's half funny, half refreshing. Because for once, here's a man clearly saying, "I've got my wife's back." And watching that moment made me remember all the times Kody didn't have Christine's back. And there were plenty. I went back and watched some older clips, and one scene really stood out. Remember when they were arguing about Ken? Ken had made that comment suggesting Kody should come back to the mainstream church, dump most of his wives, and just keep one. That comment deeply offended Christine, and understandably so. She felt it was disrespectful to their entire family. She tried to explain that to Kody. She told him it hurt. She told him it felt like he didn't care about their family at all. And instead of listening, really listening, Kody mocked her. He brushed it off and said he wouldn't even respond to Ken. That was just one example out of what feels like a million moments where Christine spoke up and Kody simply didn't care what she had to say. Worse than that, he often turned things back on her. He'd tell her he'd be nicer if she were more lovable, if she were more respectful, more trusting. And every time I hear that, I think, what on earth is this man talking about? He kept her constantly on edge. He kept her insecure. He put her down again and again. And now, all these years later, he's trying to rewrite history like none of that happened. But we watched it. In 15 years on this show, I can honestly count on one hand the times Christine truly seemed happy. She was voicing concerns about her marriage from the very first season, and it never stopped. Not once. I mean, never. Before Kody and Meri's relationship started falling apart, the big storyline was Kody and Christine struggling. Christine openly said she hated plural marriage. She told Kody she wasn't sure she even believed in it anymore. Those conversations happened early, and they kept happening. Then later, when the Kody and Meri drama took center stage, it kind of distracted everyone. But just because the spotlight moved doesn't mean things improved with Christine. They didn't, not at all. So for the entire run of this show, their marriage never looked happy, not honestly, which is why this apology, if you can even call it that, feels so strange. And believe me, it only gets worse. At one point, Kody says something like, "I apologize for being the victim, because I wasn't." And then he trails off, talking about how sometimes the experience was good, how things just sort of seeped into him, how he's not telling her what to feel. And I'm sitting there thinking, what kind of apology is this? Compare that to what he said to Janelle. With her, he actually owned things. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't have your back in the early years. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I didn't advocate for you. I didn't stick up for you." Those were clear statements, direct, real. And that just makes this whole thing with Christine feel even more off. Kody goes on to say he wishes he had done a better job, though even that sounds like it's more about shifting blame, especially when he drags Meri into it. But when you strip it all down, his apology so far boils down to two things.
"I'm sorry I said I didn't love you," and "I'm sorry I played the victim when I wasn't the victim." And then he adds, "I'm not telling you how to feel about this." Okay, but what does him playing the victim actually have to do with Christine? And when exactly was he not playing the victim? Because from where I'm sitting, that seemed to be his role for a very long time. What's missing here is the real stuff. Where is, "I'm sorry I abandoned you"? "I'm sorry I didn't help you raise Truly." "I'm sorry I wasn't there for Isabel when she needed me most." "I'm sorry I asked you to stay in a marriage where I wouldn't hold your hand or even kiss you." "I'm sorry I stopped coming over to your house." "I'm sorry I never made our relationship a priority." Where is, "I'm sorry I left you emotionally alone while you were pregnant and brought Robyn into the family"? Where is, "I'm sorry I told you I was never attracted to you"? I mean, the list is long, very long. He could have said, "I'm sorry I expected you to give me hour-long massages and never returned the favor." Or, "I'm sorry I was intimate with other women while you felt ignored and unwanted." You could go on, but instead we get, "I'm sorry I played the victim." Sorry what? How does that even begin to cover any of this? Then Kody shifts gears again. He tells Christine that part of this apology is him looking back and realizing that some moments were special at the time and place they happened. Christine nods politely. You can tell she's listening, but also wondering where this is going. Kody continues, explaining that the whole experience required him to have more than one wife. He walks through it like a timeline. He married Meri, then Janelle, then Christine. And then he admits that he was so focused on living the principle of plural marriage that he didn't really vet who he was marrying. That comment alone is something. He follows it up by saying he wasn't even supposed to fall in love, and that opens up a whole other can of worms, because wasn't the idea to love everyone equally? At least that's what they always said. Then he goes on this strange comparison, talking about how relationships with children are all different, friendships are all different, and each one fulfills you in its own way. He starts talking about higher love, and how anytime he tries to explain it, everyone just shuts him down. And honestly, this is where it all starts to sound less like an apology and more like a philosophy lecture no one asked for. Christine didn't come here for a lesson on plural marriage theory. She didn't come here for poetry or metaphors or spiritual explanations. She came for accountability. And that's still nowhere to be found. Kody admits that their marriage wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. He says, "We married under circumstances that weren't romantic. They were for me. They weren't for you." Christine responds plainly, and Kody doubles down by saying it was romantic for him, but then adds, "I didn't know better." And here's where I want to be fair and truthful.
Maybe Kody never truly loved Christine. Maybe he didn't. Honestly, who really knows? This is polygamy we're talking about, and the definition of love in that world isn't the same as what most of us think of as love. In their belief system, marriage isn't primarily about romance. It's about eternal destiny. It's about getting into the celestial kingdom. It's about spirit babies waiting in heaven to be born. The idea is that the women are already spiritually connected to the man, and the man is destined to find the women he's meant to be with. It's a big, mystical, almost fairy tale story, and it's one that's been sold very convincingly to a lot of people.
Now, Kody has been saying things like this about Christine since the very beginning. In the early seasons, he openly talked about being attracted to her because of her pedigree. Christine comes from what they call polygamy royalty. Her grandfather, Rulon, was a major figure and essentially founded the AUB, a fundamentalist Mormon group. Not the founder of fundamentalism as a whole, but a big deal in their world. Kody wanted that blue blood polygamist lineage. He believed those bloodlines were closer to God because they traced back to prophets. So yes, it's very possible that he married Christine not because he wanted to marry her, but because he wanted what she represented. At the same time, and this is important, it's also possible that over the years, something real did grow between them. Love can develop in all kinds of situations, especially when people are raising kids and sharing a life. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And that's where Kody tends to oversimplify things. He speaks in extremes. There are things he said that I don't think he's lying about. When he says he was determined to live plural marriage and wanted to collect 3 wives as fast as possible, I believe that. I really do. I think he was rushing to prove something. But where I completely disagree with him is when he says he didn't vet his wives. What does that even mean? Of course he vetted them. There were specific things he liked about each woman. He loved that Christine was bubbly, silly, light, and fun. He appreciated that Janelle was analytical, thoughtful, and could talk business with him. And with Meri, there was a strong spark, real passion. He was clearly very attracted to her and very much in love with her in the beginning. So no, these weren't random choices. He didn't blindly stumble into these marriages. He chose each woman for a reason, even if those reasons weren't always healthy or fair. That's what makes this whole apology so frustrating. There's truth mixed in with revision, reflection mixed in with excuses, and it leaves Christine and the rest of us trying to separate what's real from what's just another rewrite of history. This is exactly why this whole apology feels so off. Kody keeps saying the reason he's apologizing is because he wants Christine to remember what they had. But that's not an apology. That's nostalgia. And honestly, it feels like he's standing over an open wound, gently rubbing it and saying, "You're not really hurt because of what I did. You're hurt because of what I said later." In other words, he's trying to rewrite the reason she's upset. He's basically saying, "You're not mad about the years of neglect. You're not mad about the abandonment. You're not mad about X, Y, or Z. You're just mad because of how I talked about it afterward." But here's the problem. He was saying those things during the marriage too, not just after. So this idea that everything was wonderful and only fell apart because of a few words at the end, that doesn't hold up. What he's really trying to do is pull her back into the good memories. Remember the happy times. Remember when it was nice. And look, this approach worked with Janelle. It softened her. But it's not working with Christine at all. Christine is done. She's moved on. She's not emotionally invested in convincing Kody of anything anymore. And David, he is completely unmoved by all of this. Not impressed, not persuaded, not swayed.
The whole thing is painfully awkward. Watching it feels like being the third wheel at a conversation you were never meant to be part of. You're sitting there thinking, why am I even here? And honestly, when Kody insists he never loved Christine, it just doesn't add up. You don't marry someone, build a life, and have all those children with them if there's nothing there. It's just strange. At this point, I'm starting to believe Kody genuinely doesn't know how to apologize. I don't think he understands what he did wrong, and I don't think he even has the emotional capacity to see it. Because real apologies require empathy. You have to be able to step outside yourself and understand what the other person experienced because of your actions. Even if you didn't intend to hurt them, even if your intentions were different, you still have to acknowledge the impact. And I don't think Kody can do that. I don't think he has the empathy needed to offer a meaningful apology because he doesn't truly understand or care what he put Christine through. To treat someone the way he did for years, you almost can't be tuned into their feelings. You just can't. You can't say those things. You can't behave that way, and then turn around and not recognize that you should have treated them better, that you should have listened, that you should have made them feel heard, that you should have considered their point of view. And that's the real issue here. Not the poetry, not the metaphors, not the rewriting of history. It's the complete absence of empathy. This is the part Kody never quite gets, and honestly, it's one of the most frustrating things to watch. He should be saying, I should have acknowledged that this relationship wasn't just about you bending to what I needed. It should have been about me bending too. Because a real partnership goes both ways.
And here's something I've always found so strange about some fundamentalist groups. Certainly not all, but some. They love to quote that Bible verse about wives submitting to their husbands. They bring it up constantly, but they almost always leave out the next part. The part where it says husbands are supposed to submit to their wives the same way Christ submitted to the church. Biblically speaking, whether you agree with it or not, it was meant to be mutual, equal submission. Both people giving, both people yielding, out of love and respect for one another. It wasn't supposed to be a power grab. In today's language, submission might be better understood as honoring someone. I'll honor what you need, you'll honor what I need. We do that because we care about each other. That was never the dynamic with Kody. With him, it was always, you submit to me, period. There was no expectation that he would submit back, no real honoring, no mutual respect. And even by his own religious standards, he was getting it wrong. Because if he truly follows Christ, if he really believes in the teachings he claims to live by, the Bible is actually very clear. Men are not supposed to mistreat their wives. They're not supposed to be cruel. They're not supposed to abandon them. They're supposed to protect, respect, and honor them. If you read the Gospels, Jesus consistently went out of his way to value people, especially women who were pushed to the margins of society. He didn't shame them, he didn't devalue them, he didn't see them as less than. And no, he wasn't just sitting there having his feet washed. He was washing others' feet too. That's the whole point. Service, humility, seeing worth in every single person. I'm not a Christian anymore, but I can still say this. There are teachings in the Gospels that are genuinely beautiful. The idea that no one is beyond love, that your past doesn't erase your value, that everyone deserves dignity and compassion. So when I watch men like Kody stand there and lecture about God and authority and obedience, I can't help but think, have you actually read the Gospels lately?
Because if you had, this whole situation would have looked very different. One of the most basic teachings in the Bible is the Golden Rule. It's right there in Matthew 7:12. Do to others whatever you would like them to do to you. This is the essence of all that is taught in the law and the prophets. It doesn't get simpler than that. Treat people the way you want to be treated. If you treat people poorly, don't be shocked when they don't respond kindly. And Kody couldn't even manage that. Most Christians would also tell you that polygamy goes against the teachings of the Gospels. Biblically speaking, it would be considered adultery. And if you look at Matthew 19, Jesus is very clear about marriage. He says a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two become one. Not three, not four, one. He goes on to say that what God has joined together should not be torn apart. Adding more people into the marriage was never part of the plan. When Jesus talks about divorce, he explains that it was only allowed because of people's hardened hearts, not because it was the original intention. And then he says something even stronger. Anyone who divorces their wife and marries another commits adultery, unless there was unfaithfulness. By those standards, Kody doesn't just bend the rules, he breaks them outright. Now, Kody seems to lean heavily on the Old Testament, because yes, there were polygamists back then, fine. But even if we go there, why can't he follow the 10 Commandments from Exodus? You shall have no other gods before me, including your own ego. You shall not make idols. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord. Remember the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not lie about your neighbor. You shall not covet what belongs to your neighbor. Those are pretty clear. And yet, he can't seem to follow those either. That's why this whole thing rings hollow. It's not about faith. It's not about doctrine. It's about control and ego, dressed up in religious language. I may have left Catholicism, but there are still values in those teachings that matter to me. Basic decency, humility, compassion, accountability. And watching Kody talk about faith while doing the exact opposite of what those teachings stand for, it's hard to see him as anything other than a fraud. So now that we've established a few things, that Kody's so-called apology is empty, that his faith-based justifications don't hold water, and that none of this has anything to do with some higher calling or divine testimony, it honestly makes sense why the entire family is fed up. What he's doing to Christine, and now to David, is especially bad, and the truth is, he's never going to understand why. I'm not at all surprised that David is upset. Any husband would be. Imagine sitting there with your wife while her ex-husband looks her in the eye and starts reminiscing about how beautiful their marriage was and how much he loved her. That's not just awkward, it's wildly inappropriate. This conversation should never be happening, and it absolutely should not be happening in front of Christine's current husband. The fact that Kody even thinks this is acceptable tells me something deeper is going on.
On some level, he still sees Christine as his, like she's property he hasn't fully let go of. Because I truly cannot imagine a man in his right mind approaching his married ex and saying, "We had such a beautiful marriage. I loved you so much."
Do you hear how unhinged that sounds? If one of my exes did that today, I'd shut it down immediately. I'm married, goodbye. End of discussion. Honestly, Christine and David are showing the patience of saints here. They really are. And I'll admit it, I was skeptical of David at first. I think a lot of us were. There are definitely things he believes, politically and otherwise, that I don't agree with. But here's the thing. I don't have to agree with someone's politics to judge their character. I'm looking at who he is as a person. I'm looking at how he treats Christine. And from what we've seen, he treats her well. He supports her. He stands up for her. He doesn't try to control her or talk over her. He's not perfect, and he's not pretending to be, but he shows up for her. And after everything she's been through, she absolutely deserves that. We already know there are more awkward moments coming. Car rides, tense conversations, and probably David telling Kody he needs to apologize to the kids. But I guarantee you, behind the scenes, Christine and David are thinking the same thing we are. This is ridiculous. Why are we even doing this? Kody comes off like a complete tool, and David, without even trying, looks like the better man. Calm, grounded, respectful. And that contrast says everything. All right, I'll leave it there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, give the video a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one.